This is the Losses Become Gains podcast, the podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, tangible tools, and inspiration to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. A life where you'll discover gains from your losses and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in. Hello and welcome back to the Losses Become Gains podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo, and I'm just going to preface this episode by saying that the way that this is being recorded and the way that I am presenting this episode is nowhere near what I had planned, but in a really interesting, sort of funny way that's really very fitting with what I'm talking about today. And in this episode, I am getting into 3 things that I have learned at 33 years old. And for those who don't know, I just turned 33 on February 2nd, so this episode is releasing just a little bit after that. But really, the funny part about this episode and the irony of this episode is this is also being recorded right on the heels of me giving birth to our sweet daughter, Audrey, 5 weeks early. And I will be doing an entirely separate podcast episode about that. I was kind of planning to do sort of a birth story podcast episode down the line anyway, but her birth and entrance into this world was not at all what we expected. It's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But I also bring that up because I don't want to be triggering at all to anyone who has experienced child loss or is going through that right now. So I just want to mention that I might be bringing her up a time or two in this episode, but we will get more in depth into her story and welcoming her into our family at a later time. But I was really excited to do this episode because I think being able to reflect and just see how far we've come and what we've learned and the growth and the learnings and things that we've had throughout our life or throughout a period of time in our life is really important. And what better time to do that than turning another year older? So, of course, I could talk your ear off here and do 33 things that I've learned, because there's certainly been more than 3, but for the sake of time, of course, I am sticking to 3 very high level but pretty impactful things that I've learned in my time here on this planet so far. So I'm really excited to dive into this with you today. And, with some of these things I'm going to be mentioning, some of it definitely applies to grief and our grief journey, and you can certainly think about it that way, but this is also very just like me to you, real life lessons and learnings that I'm just really excited to share with you, and I really hope some of this resonates. If it does, please, drop me a DM, comment on Instagram, shoot me an email. Please share your story. I love meeting new people and hearing from you, and especially if any of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you today hit home for you. That's amazing if so. And if not, maybe you'll learn a little thing or two, if not about life overall, certainly about me. So I also want to just mention, again, with the timing of this episode and me kind of thinking that this episode might look and feel a little bit different, just to preface this for you, especially for those who are watching via YouTube or the actual video version of this, I am literally sitting in our daughter's now nursery, which I thought was going to be set up as my office for a little while longer. I have her crib and changing table and everything behind me. And I just have to laugh because it's not what I envisioned. And this is kind of in line with one of these life lessons today. But the reason I bring this up is because I will be very, very vulnerable and honest here and say, I didn't have the type of prep time that I normally would like to have or would have had going into this episode. Again, just full transparency here, I started kind of writing some thoughts down on things that I have learned in my 33 years leading up to my birthday. But it's so interesting. Like now welcoming our daughter earlier in the way that we did, it's like, I feel like I was just thrown more to learn, more to cope with in these last few weeks. In my 32nd year, that really, I just kind of felt the need to share. So I am doing this almost in sort of a vlog type of way. I really like, this is very unscripted. I have like my high level things I want to hit on, but just so you know, in case my thoughts seem a little perhaps scattered, I'm also very sleep deprived and there's just a lot going on right now. My husband is currently holding her in the next room, so we'll see if we hear her cry. I mean, this is so like off the cuff in a way, but that being said, I've been very excited to record this. So I don't want to belabor this and go on, but I just wanted to set this up for you because this is such real life. And listen, I kind of had to laugh. So here we go. The first big overarching lesson that really has stuck with me, and this is really one that goes back for years and years and years for me, is that timing is everything. Timing is everything. I can't tell you how many times in my life I thought I should be doing something else, or that I was just so hard on myself for not being at a certain point, maybe in my career or in a relationship, or maybe I wasn't in a relationship at the time and I thought I should be one. Having kids by a certain age, which again is hilarious to me given where my life has taken me and ended up, whatever this was. And just to give a little bit of context here too, in my mid-20s, I've talked about this a little bit before, but I was engaged once upon a time around the time I was 25. We'd been dating for 5 years. I have no ill will towards this individual. We just really honestly grew apart. Just wasn't meant to be. But there was a lot of learnings from that relationship. And there was definitely I'll say, grieving period, I guess, even though I was sort of ultimately the one to end it. There was a period of grieving where I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Am I making a mistake? I just kind of blew my whole life up. But I listened to my gut really intently in that situation. And it's interesting. And this is something I will share in the episode when I talk about our daughter's birth into this world. That was another very, very significant listening to my gut experience. And so between tapping into our intuition and also understanding that there is however you want to call this, divine timing out there that I think is so important to understand and to recognize and tap into, and know that if something is maybe not working out right now, or if you just envision something going one way or another, you're just so hung up on that. I've kind of used this analogy, I think, on this podcast before, but it's almost like a garden hose. And if the water's trying to get out, but you're squeezing it so hard, you're not allowing the natural flow of things. You're not allowing this poor hose to do its thing, which is water the plants, which is what's going to make them grow and thrive. So many situations have come up in my life where I did a little bit of that suffocating of the water garden hose, whatever I'm trying to say. And we have to surrender that. We have to just understand and know that there is a higher good. There is a higher power at play here sometimes. Not to get super spiritual, but truthfully, I do believe that. And I'm certainly not saying that you need to. This is just food for thought as always, but this is truly how I've come to take timing in life and things happening when they're supposed to, maybe versus not. And, I mentioned having kids earlier, and just with the relevancy of my daughter's birth, like there was a time in my early to mid 20s, especially when I was engaged, like, okay, I have to be engaged and married by 25, 27, so I can start having kids at 27, so I can be done by 30 and all of these things. And I'm sitting here like almost laughing to myself now because I'm like, here I am 33, and I just had my first child. There's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing freaking wrong with that. That was supposed to be my journey. And in fact, and again, this is no shade to anybody who had kids earlier. This is what I'm saying. Like, we are all, I truly believe this. We are so meant to be on the paths that we're on for a reason. Career-wise, relationship-wise, I mean, whatever this looks like for you. And again, I've mentioned this on the podcast too before. I don't want this to come off like, everything happens for a reason. Especially, I want to be especially careful with this in like the grief space of like, it's not like our loved ones were meant to die or we were meant to lose a parent or a sibling or a child or whatever. Not at all what I'm saying. Please don't at me for that. Okay. That's not at all what I'm saying. Again, just to bring it more back to the timing of things. If there's ever a time in your life where you feel like you coulda, woulda, shoulda be doing something different or something shouldn't be happening or whatever this looks like, I think it's just really important to take a lot of deep breaths and release a lot of that. Chalk it up to the universe. That was a very simple but wise piece of advice that someone gave me around that ending engagement in my 20s, where she was like, chalk it up to the universe. And I don't know what it was that it's not like she said it in any special way. I think it was just like I just needed to hear that at the time, but it really is so true. And we just have to trust sometimes that things are working in our favor. It might just not be what we anticipated or what we expected or what we'd hoped for. I mean, and that's okay. And there's grief around that. There's disappointment around that. That's life, right? Things don't always go to plan. So, what it comes down to, at least for me, was three main things here. We have to embrace a change in timing. We just have to. And I'm not saying this has to happen right away. I'm not saying this is easy, but if there's anything I've learned, it's that life is not perfect. I have learned that the hard way, the really, really hard way, very recently. I just, again, to share just a little bit of background without going into the whole story, I never envisioned the birth of our daughter going the way that it did. It was highly, highly traumatic. She was very close to not making it. I was never married to like any specific birth plan, but it's just one of those things. It's like, okay, maybe I was realistic in my expectations as far as a birth plan goes. I was very go with the flow. I, had a rough plan, but I was very open. No, like, again, life is not perfect. Life does not play by your rules as go with the flow as you think you are. It's just such a lesson in just being open, I guess. Like, I always laugh, what's that line? You want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I think that's the line. Hopefully I didn't botch that. But anyway, that's really what it comes down to for me. So just embracing that change in timing. The second thing was just not forcing anything. Again, it's like that water hose analogy. We ultimately have to embrace the changes that we face. What choice do we have, really? There are some aspects we might be able to control. I mean, this is hard when I'm kind of not talking about any specific example, but I just think it's so important. What I have personally learned is I think it's really a cool and important thing to be able to take a step back and be like, okay, instead of trying so desperately to make this work, why don't I instead kind of ask myself or ask the universe or ask God or whoever, whatever you believe in, why is this happening the way that it is? And again, I want to say here, there's not necessarily going to be an answer. The point in asking that question is not to get an answer. It's just to, again, reflect and be like, okay, what is actually happening here? what is this experience going to teach me? And listen, there might not always be a teaching moment. There might not always be a learning experience. And I know I'm being a bit contradictory right now. I catch myself in this. I apologize, and I want to acknowledge that. But I just think it's so important, again, to just reflect on these things and just have the wherewithal to recognize what's going on and being like, okay, how can I pivot? How can I not turn this around and make it into something good necessarily, but how can I just, okay, like, all right, this is not what I anticipated. This is not what I wanted. This is not what I expected. This is not what I hoped for, but I'm going to make the most of this one way or another. That comes with time. I'm not even necessarily talking about loss here. I don't want this to seem rushed if you have lost a loved one, but, just knowing that we are on the path that we're on for maybe a reason, maybe for some greater good. That's my rambling thoughts on that. I told you I was going to ramble today. My mind is not completely in the loop right now. I apologize, but here we are. The third thing that I just wanted to mention, and this is a really, really important one, is not comparing. This is huge. I am still learning this lesson, actually, to be honest. Not comparing our story, our lives, our whatever to other people. I'm sure you've heard this. I'm sure you know this, but I would be remiss if I didn't just acknowledge this. For me personally, there are influencers or people that I admire or I follow on Instagram, for example, that I'm like, man, I really love what they're doing, or man, their life just looks so good. It's so curated. I would love to travel as much as they do. I love their outfits. They're so lucky they get to do XYZ. List goes on, right? We all know that social media is very curated. And, even knowing that though, even knowing that sometimes what people post maybe it's not the full story. It's not the reality. It's only a snippet, right? In terms of out of a very, very long day or, a very much more complicated life, it's an easy trap to fall into. So, we can end up wondering like why we're not where someone else is, or we might be envious of, where other people are, where they got certain things, or how they're, seemingly so successful, or, doing whatever it is that we admire that someone else just seems to have tapped into and have. Oh my God, I've fallen into this, again, more times than I can count. People that appear to be ahead of us in some way. For me, there are people even in the grief space that are, writing these amazing books or doing this, that, or the other thing, or, started their podcast sooner or have a more successful coaching business, whatever it is. And I just have to know and understand and almost like accept in a way, or just, surrender to the fact that like I was meant to start this podcast when I was meant to start it. I probably wouldn't have been ready fully earlier had I done it before. It might not have been, I don't know, I'm not going to say as successful, but you know what I mean? Like I might not have reached the right people, or it might not have resonated as much. Like I needed time to start Losses Become Gains. Like there was a part of me that for a little while, like, man, I wish I started this earlier. I'd be further along by now. But at the same time, I'm like, well, wait a second. I wasn't in as good of a place with my grief before I started Losses Become Gains. I had this aha moment sort of to start Losses Become Gains when I did. That's something to be acknowledged. That was a really profound moment in my life, actually. So for me to then scold myself or put pressure on myself to, have tried to start it earlier, like it might not have hit people the right way. It might not have resonated. I could have almost done more damage to myself, my healing journey, my whatever, had I done it before I was ready. So again, I just want to acknowledge whatever this might look like for you, if this is something you're struggling with, as far as feeling like you might be behind or like your biological clock is ticking or whatever it is. I understand all of that. I want to validate that. Me bringing this up is not to invalidate any of that, right? I just want to mention all of this, right? The timing, the comparison game, it is so dangerous and it can be so unhealthy. And, that's just, it's a lesson that I've learned in my 33 years, really in the last 10, right? As social media and everything else on Instagram has really come into play. So there's that. But another little subset of this is just something I wanted to bring up was this idea of hustle culture and where we are putting our energy, because this has really been a big lesson for me actually in this last year, especially. Hustle culture has been around for a while now, right? This is nothing new. At first, I will be very honest, there was a part of me that was all about it. I was like, yeah, I want to hustle. I'm going to get there faster. I want to be this boss babe, even climb the corporate ladder, and just whatever this looked like in my life at the time. I was like, yeah, hustle. Cool. Sounds fun. But the thing about this idea of hustle culture, and this isn't to shame anybody who's all about it or deeply believes in that. The only sort of learning that I wanted to share today was that I personally feel that it's a slippery slope. And I almost don't even love the word hustle because it implies a lack of rest and reset and sort of a lack of pause and reflection. And not that you can't pause and reflect as you're hustling. I don't want to imply anyone's not doing that. But for me now, at least in the point of life that I'm in, hustling just sounds exhausting. I want to hustle on my terms. There are absolutely times where I might be doing something for losses become gains and I'm like, yeah, I'm on it. I am on one. This feels really good. I'm all about it, right? I'm owning that. But I wouldn't so much call it a hustle. It's just this flow of energy, this creativity, this lightness, this expansiveness. And I almost like that word expansiveness more, right? Because it's breaking a piece of ourselves open that is going into this outlet that is so beautiful and healthy. And whatever this looks like for you, it doesn't have to be, some grief empire, I'm trying to build or anything. This could be a sport. This could be cooking. This could be a hobby, spending time with your family. I mean, there's no rules here, right? But I guess where I'm going with this hustle aspect is that there's this implication that we always have to be on, right? And what happens when we're always on? What happens when a light bulb is always on? It can burn out, right? And we can burn out too. It doesn't allow this room for the flow, right? So there's this time and space for the hustle, sure, but what I've personally learned, and you don't have to agree with me on this, but this is just me, is that the hustle isn't everything. It's not. It's a piece of us, if you even want to call it that. But I think we just need to be really discerning with where we put our energy. That's what I have learned. That's what I have taken away from this. Hustle culture and doing the damn thing and going hard on something, it's all what you make of it. You can have goals. You can want things. You can have aspirations. I encourage that. Absolutely. I think that's amazing. It's what I help my members of my membership get into, an intentional life after loss. That's kind of the point. It's to live this beautiful, happy, healthy life after loss. So in a way, I certainly encourage this, but with time, with the sacred pause, with tapping into ourselves and our wants and needs and desires without feeling pressure. Because it's all about kind of what we want to manifest for ourselves without putting that pressure on. Because personally, what I've seen a lot of sometimes, and listen, again, hustle culture can work for some people, but for me personally, I have seen too many situations where that hustle or whatever, you kind of end up doing things for the wrong reasons. Or more importantly, you lose track of your why, right? Why it was important to you in the first place, why you care, why it's important, how it is going to serve your fellow humans and the greater humanity, your community, right? So I think just learning to, release that, I think is very important. It's all about finding a very delicate balance of, hard work. Hard work's great. That's important. But also just having this beautiful vision and this manifestation for yourself, and finding this, again, this really lovely flow state between the two. And once again, getting back to the why of what you want for yourself and putting that vision and that intention out there into the universe. So that was a lot. That all was technically under number 1, which was timing, but I had to throw a couple other little things in there, hopefully some little nuggets of gold that you can just think about today, because I thought that was all really important to mention. That all sort of fell under that first umbrella for me. But number 2 in these things that I've learned at 33 years old, this one will be a little bit shorter, I promise, is this concept of moving forward is not the same as moving on. I have been in this situation in not only just with the loss of my parents and my sweet dog and other things that I have grieved in my life, but like even losses of a friendship or even a loss of a job. I mean, like these things that so many people and society and the greater collective will sometimes be like, why can't you just move on already? It's been a year, or it's been X amount of time, or, everyone has their opinions. Everyone has their expectations on how things should be or should be done. And it's so important, I think, to stay in our own lane, both with what we project onto other people, but also what we allow to get to us in a way. So let me expound on this just like a little bit. So for me, at least, the difference between moving forward and moving on, because I know these can sound very synonymous, which I guess you could argue they are. But I personally feel there is a subtle difference that's important to call out. And especially in the grief space, we see this moving on versus moving forward. I've talked about it on social media before. And I think really the biggest difference that I've taken away is moving on, again, especially in grief, has sort of a negative connotation because it implies that like you almost like can't take your loss, or you can't take the adversity you've been through, or whatever this looks like. Like you can't take it with you. Like you have to literally just get over it, move on, right? Like, and that leaves a bad taste in my mouth, at least. I don't love it. What I would much prefer to do is move forward with all of these life experiences as a part of me, as a part of my story, as a part of something that has made me who I am in my 33 years Earthside so far. So, when we move forward, or we even think of beginning to move forward after, let's say, a big life event, a major loss, a divorce, whatever it is, I have learned, and I want to encourage one important thing here as sort of a subset, again, of this larger learning, but really owning your magic and learning how to do that. Because we all have incredibly special magic and skills and parts of our soul and our being that really make us unique. And again, so I'm just going to bring up social media for a moment, or actually maybe even better, fellow grief coaches out there. I am not the only grief coach out there in the world, but there might be people that come to me specifically. This has actually happened specifically because I lost both of my parents. I lost both of my parents close together. There were certain parts of my story, or maybe it's not even having to do with my parents. It's just like people just happen to resonate with my energy versus someone else's, or vice versa. Maybe they went in a different direction and wanted to coach with someone else because of their story or their energy. That's amazing. That's okay. Like that, again, that's just an example, but social media, again, there's like a bazillion influencers out there now. We don't follow them all, right? We follow the ones that do something for us, that elicit something in us, that make us feel some type of way. And that's the thing. We each, again, have our own magic. And so, I just think it's so important to focus on that whenever you move forward, let's say, with a new project, or even more importantly, a new phase in life. So, that is something that took me a while to recognize and learn after my parents died, but I found my footing. I found a way to, for example, speak about grief and loss that was very much my own, while also being very inspired by not only my life experiences, but others' life experiences too. Like, we are all constantly taking creativity and inspiration from lots of aspects of our lives, from other people and from our own learnings and, experiences and all of the things. So I think that's also really important to tap into. And if you have a tough time tapping into that, like journaling, again, meditating, doing some breath work, like reading really inspirational books. I've mentioned this before. The first book that I read after both my parents died, this was like within weeks of my dad dying after my mom, was Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And I have to say that book really just sparked something in me. It really elicited what I needed at the time. Like, that book, I truly think was like dropped on my lap for a reason. It's one of my favorite books. And I highly recommend, this is not an ad, by the way, I just highly recommend this book. But I genuinely think that certain, support or help or tools or resources or whatever are meant to find us when they do, maybe even for a reason. And it's so beautiful because I've had some people occasionally reach out to me, or members of my community or of my membership, and they're like, I genuinely feel like this was supposed to find me when it did. Like, this resonated with me so much. Or even if it's not something huge, just somebody being like, hey, thank you for this post. I needed this today. Right? So I just feel like the universe has its own ways of putting things in front of us that we need or really need to hear. But all of that to say, I want you to know, and I want you to remember so deeply that you do have a beautiful magic inside of you. I know it might not always feel that way. It might seem really hard to tap into right now. You might not even think it exists. This can be especially difficult after loss, when we feel like everything has been stripped from us and that we will just like never find ourselves again. We will never be happy again. Like, I've been there, you guys. I know how hard it is to feel like we're not drowning in that sometimes. But I just want to encourage you, to take that with you and not seeing moving forward as a bad thing, or a scary thing, or an intimidating thing, or something that can't be done, especially if we have experienced a loss, which if you are listening to this podcast, you probably have, right? This is a very creepy podcast. We talk about life after loss here. This is such an important concept, but it's one that I want to acknowledge can be really difficult to wrap our heads around after we have lost someone, or maybe multiple people that are really important, pivotal people in our lives. And that is not easy. And so this is why I come back to this moving forward versus moving on. It is not to negate what we've been through. It is not to simply just be like, okay, like find some gratitude, or, just be happy with what you have, or, just find some silver lining. Like, no, those are only such small parts of it all. It's all part of this moving forward concept. But I personally am of the belief that it is possible. I personally have found ways to move forward with my life in my marriage, in having children, in my career, and all of these things, because I've had to, because my parents aren't here. I was left with no choice. That was a reality I was forced to face without my permission, right? Death came knocking. That happened. So it got to the point where I was like, well, I can kind of go one of two ways with this. And so when we talk about moving forward, or we talk about grief work, or, whatever it is, the support that we get to help us through our losses in life, all of this are just small pieces of it, and figuring out how to move forward in a way that is meaningful, is intentional, that allows us to carry our grief proudly and as our ally, and not as our frenemy, as I like to say. And maybe even smile every now and again when we can, right? Maybe even a little bit of dark humor. There's some great grief accounts that I know are with me on that. And, because you just almost can't even process fully the depth of some of our losses here. So, what else are you going to do, right? Sometimes we need that little, we need to laugh. We need to laugh, right? So with that all being said, let's move on to the final lesson here that I've learned at 33 years old. Final point here. And I really wanted to end with this one because this is very relevant to my life as of late. And that is one thing that is guaranteed in life is change. But also, we are not guaranteed anything. We're not guaranteed anything, right? We are not guaranteed tomorrow, to sound super cliche, but it is so true. We're not guaranteed a job. We're not guaranteed that we won't lose a loved one. Change is inevitable. Like I said, have learned this the hard way, especially recently. Life is going to continue to challenge you. And it is such a lesson. I mentioned this earlier. It's such a lesson in going with the flow, trusting this higher good in a way, but also giving ourselves permission to be like, no, you know what? This is, pardon my language, but this is shit. This really sucks. I am not okay. And owning that and being okay saying that out loud, being comfortable to seek the help that we might need, and doing so in a way that honors and recognizes the ebbs and flows of life that are inevitably going to come. Things will not go to plan. A lot of things might go to plan, and that's wonderful. For us, type A, I'm a little bit type A, I'd say. For some type A people out there, gonna love that. But listen, life's gonna throw us some curveballs, right? This has been the story of my life these last several years, between the deaths of my parents, the death of my dog. This has been the story of my life, especially in the last several years, but really very much throughout my 20s as well. This can look like anything. I mean, this can look like a major loss, of course, but we also might have like a change in job, or like we, who knows what could happen? We get fired, or like a company could get shut down or bought out or something. We can have someone in our inner circle or a friend kind of ghost us. That also happened to me. Or just, disappoint us in a way, and we have to kind of reevaluate that relationship. This, moving, I mean, this can look like so many different things. This goes really beyond the typical, I'm going to say, the typical major loss here. We never know what's around the corner. We just don't. So it comes down to, coping with adversity in whatever form this is. This is what I'm all about, and giving tools and resources and things to think about in order to do that. But with that all being said, just to kind of finish this up, I think there is something to be said about the value of being open-minded, and just this concept of open-mindedness. And it's something that I again, in the spirit of things I've learned, it's something that I've learned in a lot of different ways from a lot of different aspects of my life. I've lived in different places in the US. I've lived abroad for short stints of time, and I'm so grateful for that. But I also kind of made that happen for myself. So that was, again, the manifesting, the hard work on my part, the beautiful marriage of the two. But experiencing those different cultures and through travel, I was very fortunate that I had two parents that really welcomed and valued open-mindedness and, other opinions and other walks of life, and to be very mindful and to be a good listener and to respect that and to, hear people, not just listen. I've not always been the best at that, but I feel like I'm getting better, especially since becoming a coach. But, and just having that example set for me, which I know not everyone does, but, having a variety of jobs that have allowed me to meet a wide range of people. I worked in hospitality in the wine industry for a while and met some very awesome, interesting characters through that, right? So open your mind a little bit here and think about where you can learn from. It's not always just necessarily things that you kind of end up like teaching yourself. Like there's really so many different avenues that we can take away little bits and pieces from to really create this very, again, expansive, I keep using that word today, but that's really how I'm feeling going into 33. And again, we can create this expansive, very enriched life for ourselves that is only going to benefit us. It's only going to increase our empathy, our compassion for others. And I think there's more of that needed out there for sure. So, but that also, going back to the whole theme of this, the one thing that's guaranteed is change, and that we're also not guaranteed anything in life, is it just makes us a little more, I'm going to use this word because I can't think of a better word right now. It makes us a little more resilient, but it's, it's not just our experiences that make us resilient. It's how we cope with them. It's how we get the right support and how we get the right tools and how we can have a support system that we can lean on. And, having those experiences under our belt, or observing what other people have done, perhaps in a certain similar situation or something like that, that we can, again, observe. I'm super grateful for that because it really has allowed me to tap into a new level of empathy and compassion and understanding all of the things that I just listed above and more. And that has really added value to my life, and it has opened my mind in the spirit of being open-minded. So, but to bring it back to this kind of main point, the open-mindedness is important, but I feel like that is such an important part in how we view change and if we're open to change. And listen, some people are naturally a little more closed off to change. They struggle with change a little bit. That's okay. We are all here. We are all wired differently. But, I've talked about this a little bit on social media before, but I saw this somewhere actually, and I think it's a really profound thing. It's not our trauma. It's not like so specifically what has happened to us that creates resiliency or elicits this resiliency in us. It's how we cope with it. It's how we seek the right support and the right tools and the right, kind of people around us, our tribe, for lack of a better term. And that's a beautiful mixture of things when we can really own all of that and tap into all of that. And each one of those things together really enables us to create this existence for ourselves that has so much value and so much beauty and integrity and respect for other people. And that's personally where I'm leaving 32 and going into 33, and I want more of that. I want to take all of these life experiences so far and things I observe, from others around me, and whether or not they've gone through similar situations to me or not, whether or not I learn something so specifically from someone that I'm like, ooh, that was really good. I'm going to take that and incorporate that into my life too. And I don't even mean anything grief related here. I could just mean the perspective that someone has on life. And I could be like, wow, that's really beautiful. I want to remember that. I want to take that with me. I think that's really important. But also in that same boat, I guess, we can learn to let some things go too. And we can be like, ooh, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't resonate with me personally. And each of us are so different. We're also unique. What's going to resonate and hit home for one person is not going to for someone else. And I think it's, again, just to bring it full circle, that intuition, that gut that I was talking about earlier. This wasn't even on my list for this episode, but I'm going to close it out here. Listen to your intuition. It speaks to you. It really does. And when we can cut out some of the noise, social media is a big one, right? The opinions of others, all of these coulda, woulda, shouldas, the pressure that we put on ourselves, when we can drop our shoulders, which I'm literally trying to do right now, take some deep breaths, and just know that we are right where we're meant to be. And finding a little bit of peace through that. And like I said, we can have our goals. We can have the things that we want to work toward. I think that's amazing. I think that's a very motivating, incredible opportunity that we have as humans here in our lifetime to create something beautiful, whatever this is for you. I say go after it. But enjoy your peace too. And enjoy what is meant for you. And allow that to come in and fill you up, no matter if you've gone through loss or not, and you're listening to this. I just want to leave you with that today, because that really, out of everything that I've also talked about today, I think is probably the biggest takeaway that I've learned. And honestly, I've learned that the most in the last year or two of my life. It's something I wish I knew a little bit earlier, when I was clinging so tightly to certain things throughout my life, being a certain way, looking a certain way. But I can also say that despite everything that I have been through, losing members of my family, etc., I feel like I am right where I am meant to be. And that is a really profound thing to be able to say. Do I wish for certain things? Do I want to manifest certain things? Do I want to keep growing in my life and do big, awesome things? Yes. Hell yes, I do. But finding that inner peace, that is awesome when we can finally tap into that. And I just promise you, it will take so much stress off your plate. It will take so much pressure off of life, which, if you've lost someone, is so short and it's so limited, our time here. So I just wanted to share these scrambled thoughts with you today, as just openly and vulnerably as possible. Like I said, as I mentioned in the beginning, if there was anything that I touched on here today that you resonate with, or you're like, yeah, I totally can empathize with this, or not, that's okay. I would love to hear from you. Shoot me a DM, pop an email into my inbox. I love hearing from people. And thank you for joining me for this very planned but not planned episode. More to come. But I truly just appreciate each and every one of you on this journey with me. I realized we are at episode 41. I cannot believe there are over 40 episodes of this podcast, by the way. I just wanted to end by saying that. So truly, truly from the bottom of my heart, a genuine thank you. And love you to everyone who has tuned in so far. If you are a newer listener, you've been around a while, just thank you. And thank you for bearing with my somewhat scattered thoughts today. It's going to get better, I promise. We're still getting our bearings here. She's not even a month old yet. So that all being said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I am sending you so much love and the biggest hugs and all the good things, and I will catch you in the next episode. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you're taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, more coping tools, ways to work with me, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Losses Become Gains Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. And remember to always keep asking yourself, how will I turn my losses into gains today? I'll catch you in the next episode.